Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are checking out our first custom RTX 3060 Ti. Now 3060 Ti did launch at the beginning of the month, but since then we've also had the launch of the RX 6900 XT and then Cyberpunk 2077, so it's taken until now to get in our first review of an AIB card. The card we're looking at is Palit RTX 3060 Ti GamingPro OC. This has a large triple fan cooler. Palit has also applied a pretty hefty factory overclock, and there's also a significant bump to the power target of this card compared to reference specification. The question is it enough to beat out the Founders Edition? Before we get into that though guys, I just want to take a quick moment to say, if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell. It's just a quick and easy way to help us out. Thank you. Starting off with a look at the design then. If this card looks familiar to you, that's probably because it is. It's actually using the same shroud design as the Palit RTX 3080 GamingPro OC that we reviewed a couple of months ago. That means it's made mostly out of black plastic, but there is a metal grill type plate thing that is screwed on top of the central and outermost fans, but this is purely for aesthetics and doesn't really affect the overall build quality or rigidity of the card. We can also see the same triple fan setup, with each fan measuring 85mm, and they use these kind of semi-translucent fan blades. Personally, I don't think this is the absolute best looking card I've ever seen, but at the same time it's not the worst looking card I've ever seen either, so I can't really complain. It is also very colour neutral, so you'll have no issues including this in a colour coordinated build. Because it is using the same overall design as the 3080 model, this 3060 Ti GamingPro OC is pretty big for a GPU of this caliber. It actually measures in at 294 by 112 by 60mm, so it's almost 30cm long. The flip side to this is that Palit has ensured the card itself is no taller than the PCIe bracket, giving it quite a long and narrow appearance. Moving on to the backplate though, this is the primary difference between the designs of the 3080 and the 3060 Ti GamingPro OC models. Here, Palit has gone for plastic on the 3060 Ti, and I do find this a bit disappointing. First of all, 3060 Ti isn't a budget card. This card is meant to cost over £400, so it just doesn't give it much of a premium feel. It's also not going to do anything for heat dissipation from the back of the PCB, as it's literally just a piece of plastic that's been stuck on top. For me, I really do expect to see a metal backplate on GPUs at this price point. Elsewhere, we can also see two 8-pin power connectors are needed, but because the PCB is actually quite short and the cooler overhangs it by about 4 inches, that means these two connectors are pretty centrally positioned, which could be an issue for some if you are particularly fussy about your cable management. For display outputs though, we have 3 DisplayPort 1.4a and then 1 HDMI 2.1. Looking now at the PCB, we can see Palit has opted for a 10-phase VRM for the GPU, and that is using a UPI UP9512R controller. The memory VRM is 2-phase using the UPI U1666Q controller. Palit is also using onsemi's NCP 302150 MOSFETs for GPU power delivery, but Sinopower SM7342EKKP MOSFETs are used for the memory. We can also note the use of Samsung GDDR6 memory modules, and those are rated at 16 gigabits per second. As for the cooler, just like the RTX 3080 model, the heatsink here is covered by a large die-cast aluminium alloy plate. This plate contacts with the memory chips as well as the VRM componentry. Under that plate, Palit is using 2 aluminium fin stacks, which are connected by 4 6mm heat pipes, so that is 2 less than the 3080 GamingPro OC. The GPU die contacts with a separate base plate sitting above the 4 heat pipes. So that is it for our look at the card, and we're now going to move on to talk about performance. For this, all of our testing was conducted using our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist. This consists of an i9 10900K running at 5.1 GHz across all cores, and that is paired with the ASUS ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard. We also have 32GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory clocked at 3600 MHz. Starting off performance with a look at the thermals then. In terms of the out-of-the-box temperatures, the GamingPro OC proved to be an exact match for the Founders Edition, with a peak GPU temperature of 69 degrees, alongside the steady state result of 68 degrees. This is a very solid result for the GamingPro OC, and while it may be a larger card than the Founders Edition, we have to remember it is also running with a higher power target, so either way, we can't complain when seeing sub 70 degree temperatures. So while stock thermal performance may be identical to the Founders Edition, noise levels are a little bit higher. Not by a lot, with the GamingPro OC hitting 39 decibels compared to 37 decibels for Nvidia's design, but that difference is noticeable to the human ear. It's still a very quiet card mind, just not as quiet as the Founders Edition. Default fan behaviour sees those fans spin up to 45% or 1800 RPM under load. Given the GamingPro OC is already pretty close to that 40 decibel noise level, there isn't much thermal performance to be gained when tuning the fan curve. We only needed to increase the fan speed from 1800 RPM up to 1890 RPM to hit 40 decibels of noise, and accordingly, GPU temperatures only dropped by a single degree. This means the card runs 4 degrees hotter than the Founders Edition when noise normalized, but again, we can't forget that the GamingPro OC is also running a higher power target. Speaking of the power target, the total graphics power for this card is rated at 240 watts, and we actually saw the GamingPro OC average 244 watts over the duration of our stress test. This is a pretty significant increase over the Founders Edition to the tune of 27%, but let's see how much faster the GPU can run due to that increased power. For that, we are going to head into our games testing, and in this video we're going to be focusing on 1440p. If you do want to see 1080p and even 4K data though, as well as all of our other benchmarks, make sure to head over and read the written review on kitguru.net. Getting into the games though, we will start with a look at Remedy's control. And here the GamingPro OC is able to use its higher clock speed to outperform the Founders Edition by 5% at 1440p. Bear in mind though, that's a difference of just 3 frames per second. Next up, we'll go to Cyberpunk 2077, and while we don't yet have full comparison data for all of our GPUs in this game, we can see the GamingPro OC comes in 4% faster than the Founders Edition at 1440p. Again though, do bear in mind this is only a real world difference of 2 frames. We'll also look at F1 2020, and this game sees the GamingPro OC average 142 FPS at 1440p resolution. This is a lead of 5 frames per second compared to the Founders Edition, or another 4% difference in Palit's favour. Moving on now to Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This game bucks the trend somewhat, with the GamingPro OC barely any faster than the Founders Edition at 1440p. The difference between the two cards is a single frame, or just 1%. And finally, we'll also take a look at Watch Dogs Legion. This title sees the GamingPro OC hit 66 FPS on average at 1440p, giving the GamingPro OC another 3% advantage over the Founders Edition. Of course, we also tried our hand at manual overclocking to see how far we could push the GPU. To do this, we used MSI Afterburner and maxed out the power limit at 112%. We were also able to add 110 MHz to the GPU core and 1100 MHz to the memory. In practice, this resulted in the GPU running about 2085 MHz under load. That overclock resulted in gains of 6% in every game we retested at 1440p, including F1 2020, Watch Dogs Legion and Gears 5. That is certainly a decent overclock, but it's also not going to set the world on fire, but we'll certainly take it. We can also see that power draw increased by 11% up to 272 watts on average. Wrapping up this review then, this has been our first look at a custom 3060 Ti, and overall I have to say Palit has done a good job. I wouldn't necessarily say that the GamingPro OC is clearly better than the Founders Edition, but they have slightly different priorities. Out of the box thermal performance is identical between the two, but the Palit does run slightly faster. Against that, the Nvidia card is also slightly quieter out of the box, and when noise normalized, the Palit GPU did run 4 degrees hotter, but again, we have to take into account it is running with a significantly higher power target. So while I wouldn't necessarily say it was a clear improvement over the Founders Edition, I think that probably says more about just how good Nvidia's Founders cards really are, and at the end of the day, the GamingPro OC is still a very decent card that I'd be happy to use myself. Ordinarily, our main criticism would just come down to pricing, as Palit told us that the MSRP for this GPU is £449 here in the UK, and that's just £20 less than the MSRP for the RTX 3070. Clearly, in a normal world, that wouldn't make much sense, but I don't really think pricing is normal at all for any GPU right now. Just the other day, in fact, I saw 10 plus RTX 3070s come into stock, priced at £650, and within an hour, they were all sold out. In that world, paying £450 for a 3060 Ti doesn't seem nearly so bad as it would usually. Of course, all being well, we would hope to have a good supply of GPUs sooner rather than later, and if we do start to see 3060 Ti's appearing at the MSRP of £369, paying an extra £80 for the gaming OC wouldn't be something I would recommend. Until that happens though, these cards are just going to sell out anyway, irrespective of the high MSRP, so it really does seem to be a case of get whatever GPU you can get your hands on. That is going to do it for this review though guys, so if you liked it, toss me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the GamingPro OC, and in a normal world, would you pay an extra £80 for this card over the baseline MSRP? You can also subscribe if you haven't already, hit that notification bell, and why not head over to our Discord server, which is linked in the description. It would also be awesome if you guys would consider backing us on Patreon, where you can get access to exclusive giveaways and even see some of our content early. Until then though guys, I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.